I'm Elwood Mays, 31 years old, living in Tucson, Arizona. I work quietly behind the scenes fixing medical equipment that saves lives, but no one in my family seems to notice or care. Growing up, I was always the shadow, the forgotten son, the one who didn't quite fit their picture of success. They say blood is thicker than water, but in my family, loyalty was a word whispered behind closed doors while favors were handed to my younger brother Radley. Today, I'm about to share a story that will take you through betrayal, secrets, and a fight for what was always mine but kept from me. It's a story where the line between family and enemy blurs, and the truth doesn't come easily. If you want to hear the whole journey, from the deepest lows to the moment everything changed, hit that like button, subscribe, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching from and what you think is really going on. This isn't just my story. It could be anyone's who's ever been overlooked, underestimated, and pushed aside. Let's dive in. I received the baby shower invitation only 12 hours before the event, handwritten in the corner, "Bring food if you can." While guests arrived in gleaming SUVs, I parked my beat-up pickup behind the dumpsters. A stranger glanced at me and asked, "Are you with the catering staff?" That was the tone of my entire existence in this family. Mistaken for hired help, forgotten until necessary, and always the one expected to carry something without complaint. The invitation came slipped beneath my front door. No postage, no formal greeting, just a card with plastic ducks and glittery cursive font inviting me to celebrate the upcoming arrival of baby Mays, my brother Radley's baby. The golden boy of the Mays family was now starting a family of his own, and they were throwing him a celebration in the form of a full-blown backyard gala at my father's mansion. I sat on the edge of my bed that night, reading the note twice. The line about food stuck with me, more like a command than a request. Bring food if you can. Translation: do something useful for once. It had been over a year since I'd last heard from anyone in my immediate family. No calls, no visits, no invitations for the holidays. They knew where I lived. They just didn't care unless they needed something. And now I was expected to show up and smile like I belonged. I opened the fridge. Not much in there, but leftover pasta, expired yogurt, and a few eggs. In the freezer sat a small bag of cornmeal I'd kept for months, and just enough butter to make it work. I pulled out my mother's old recipe card, lemon honey cornbread, the one she used to make every Thanksgiving before she passed. If I was going to bring food, I'd bring something that had meaning, something with heart. I stayed up late baking it, letting the scent of lemon and sweet corn fill my small apartment. It reminded me of her warmth, her presence, how even in our smallest moments she made everything feel big. My mother had been gone for nearly 20 years, and with her, most of the love in our household evaporated. After she passed, my father remarried Lenora, a woman as polished as she was cold. Radley adored her. I survived her. By sunrise, the cornbread was neatly packed in a worn-out Tupperware container lined with foil. I cleaned the dust off my truck's dashboard and took the back roads to the neighborhood I used to call home. My father had moved into a sprawling house in the hills, gated, pristine, and guarded by landscaping worthy of a golf course. As I approached, the street was already lined with luxury cars, their windows tinted to keep out both sunlight and people like me. I parked 2 blocks down, behind a sanitation container, and made my walk of shame toward the mansion. The front door was open. I walked in without knocking. The house was buzzing with voices and laughter, and the scent of catered shrimp and rosemary skewers drifted through the air. The walls were decorated with gold and blue banners. "Radley's gonna be a daddy, and it's a boy." Balloons shaped like bottles and rattles dangled from the chandeliers. A woman with a clipboard was directing guests like a wedding planner. I spotted Lenora near the buffet. She wore an ivory silk blouse with pearls and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Elwood," she said, her voice pitched just loud enough to draw a few heads. "You made it. That's thoughtful." Her eyes dropped to the plastic container in my hands. "Is that your dish? You can leave it with catering out back. They'll find space for it." I nodded without responding and did as she asked, walking past the crowd toward the outdoor setup. The backyard was covered with white tents and round tables dressed in lace. A string quartet played near the garden. Servers moved in pairs, refilling mimosas. I found the buffet line and placed my humble container between trays of imported cheeses and crab cakes. I turned to walk back into the house, but not before catching a glimpse of my father standing near the pool, surrounded by guests. He was laughing, his voice booming over the music. His arms were thrown around Radley, who looked like he'd just stepped out of a fashion magazine. His fiancée, Blair, stood beside him, one hand resting on her baby bump, the other holding a glass of non-alcoholic champagne. My father, Halston Mays, looked over and noticed me. "Elwood," he shouted, raising a glass. "Glad to see you crawled out of your technician cave for this. Everyone, this is my oldest. He fixes things. Hospital machines, right, El?" A ripple of polite laughter followed. "Diagnostic systems," I said flatly. "I work in biomed, equipment maintenance, and systems upgrades." "Same difference," he quipped. "Anyway, Radley just signed a lease for a 5-bedroom up north. Got a promotion, and well, a baby on the way. We're really proud of him. Really proud." I stood still, nodded, pretended the punchline didn't sting. I looked at Radley, who barely acknowledged me with a nod. We used to build tree houses together. None of them noticed the lone man standing by the fence, arms crossed, a foil-covered dish gone untouched on the buffet. The lemon cornbread I'd made from Mom's old recipe, the one I baked with care and carried here in my aging hands, now sat behind a dessert tower, half hidden by fancier food, a practical joke in the land of caviar. One of the caterers even moved it aside without a second glance, and I watched it happen without moving, my jaw tight, my fists in my pockets. It was the most accurate metaphor for my place in this family, quietly pushed aside, out of sight, not hated, just forgotten. Inside the house, the air was cooler, but no less suffocating. I stepped in through the back door, entering a sea of pastel streamers and curated perfection. The living room had been transformed into a shrine to Radley's success. Photographs of him receiving awards, closing deals, hugging Blair on a yacht. A table near the entrance showcased childhood drawings Radley had made, preserved like sacred relics. My own contributions to childhood, the cardboard robot I built from scraps, the county science fair ribbon I won when I was 11, they were nowhere to be seen. It was like my chapter had been torn from the family album, my name erased, my legacy repackaged as Radley's alone. As I stood there, blinking at a slideshow of Radley's life projected onto the far wall, Lenora materialized beside me with a drink in hand and a smile that was all teeth. "You found your way in," she said, her voice honeyed but hollow. "There's a seat for you by the side hallway, quieter there, so you won't be overwhelmed." Overwhelmed? I wanted to laugh. Instead, I nodded, because arguing with Lenora was like yelling at wallpaper. She didn't respond to resistance, only obedience. I followed her gesture toward the table she'd assigned me, passing groups of people clinking glasses and complimenting the color palette of the baby shower. I caught fragments of conversations, business mergers, vacation homes, IVF clinics, private school wait lists. Not a single topic felt like anything I could add to. My seat was at a 2-person table near the laundry room, directly facing a thermostat and partially hidden by a large ficus. A single blue balloon sagged above my name card, which read Elwood with an extra L, like I was a misspelled character from someone else's story. I sat down and stared at the folds in the plastic tablecloth, the hum of the air conditioning a low and steady rhythm in my ears. From my angle, I could see the center of the living room, where Radley stood like the sun, every face turned toward him. He looked polished, confident, the kind of man who had been told all his life that the world would open for him if he just smiled the right way. And it had. A server passed me without stopping. No drinks, no greeting, just a glance and a pivot. I tried to catch the eye of a cousin, someone I hadn't seen in years, but she turned away just as I raised my hand. I shifted in my seat and looked down at the plate in front of me. It was empty. No one had brought me a drink, not even water. I stood up, walked over to the bar, poured myself a cup of lemonade, and returned to my corner, feeling the weight of every footstep like a quiet accusation. When I sat back down, someone had placed a small envelope on my plate. Inside was a game card, guess the baby's due date, with a plastic pin attached. I looked around. Everyone else's cards had already been filled out and dropped into a glass jar labeled Future Fortune. Mine was the only one still untouched. BMC, some friend of Radley's named Griffin, the kind of guy who wore pastel suits unironically, took the mic and began a trivia game about Radley and Blair. What was Radley's SAT score? What's Blair's favorite wine? What stock did Radley invest in before it went public? The crowd answered with laughter and enthusiasm. I didn't raise my hand. I didn't know the answers. I wasn't part of this club. Not socially, not emotionally, not even biologically anymore, it seemed. At one point, Radley made a short speech. He held Blair's hand and thanked everyone for coming. He joked about fatherhood, about sleepless nights and diaper explosions, and everyone laughed right on cue. He paused for a moment, glanced in my direction, barely, and said, "And to those who came from far away and those who took time from their busy schedules, thanks for being here." His pause after busy schedules was just long enough to sting. A few guests turned toward me. A couple nodded awkwardly, and then the moment passed like a breeze through an open door. My father, Halston, stepped up next. He raised a glass of champagne and began praising Radley's accomplishments, listing off milestones like a proud CEO presenting quarterly earnings. Top of his class, fastest promotion at the firm, now bringing the next Mays generation into the world. He turned slightly, looked toward me with a smile too sharp to be warm, and added, "Not everyone in the family takes that kind of initiative, but it's fine. Every family has different strengths, I suppose." The room laughed. A soft, knowing chuckle that said, "We get it. We see who really matters here." I didn't move. I didn't blink. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. But inside, something shifted. Not bitterness, not even pain, just clarity. This was about who fit their version of success. As the speeches ended and the crowd drifted toward the dessert table, I stood quietly and stepped outside, walking along the edge of the house until I reached the side gate. I didn't leave. I just needed air. I needed space. The same feeling I'd chased all my life. 1 inch of space to breathe in a world that had decided I was unnecessary. I leaned against the brick wall, watching the horizon burn gold in the distance. I knew if I went back inside, it wouldn't stop there. But I also knew I couldn't avoid it forever. So I took a deep breath, adjusted the collar on my wrinkled button-up shirt, and stepped back into the house, where the music had shifted into a more upbeat playlist and the scent of cinnamon and citrus wafted from the dessert table. I caught sight of Lenora speaking with 2 women from her yoga studio, gesturing gracefully with a glass of wine in hand, her pearls glinting under the chandelier. As I passed behind her, she didn't acknowledge me, but one of the women whispered something into her ear while glancing in my direction. Lenora responded with a small, controlled smile and an almost imperceptible shrug, like I was an unfortunate detail she couldn't airbrush out of the family photo. I returned to my lonely seat in the corner just as the event's host, Griffin, reappeared with his signature stage voice and a microphone in hand. "All right, everyone," he called out, his grin sharp and rehearsed. "Time for our next little game. Who knows Radley best? Gather around, folks, and let's find out who's been paying attention all these years." Chairs scraped, heels clicked, and the guests surged forward like moths to a well-lit flame. I stayed seated, assuming the activity would bypass me like everything else had. But then Griffin looked around and said, "Let's get some family involved." "Elwood, there you are." The microphone's sudden attention pulled every eye toward me. "Why don't you kick things off with the first question?" I froze. I muttered, standing slowly. "Aye, sure." I walked toward the front as Griffin handed me a card. "Read it loud and proud, cousin," he said, patting me on the back like I was a contestant on a game show. I glanced at the card. The question read, "What was Radley's nickname in middle school?" I paused. I didn't know the answer. Not because I hadn't cared, but because by the time Radley had middle school nicknames, I was already working part-time to help pay bills, coming home too late to share in his daily triumphs or pranks. Still, I read it aloud. "What was Radley's nickname in middle school?" A few guests giggled knowingly. "Radman," someone shouted. "No, Rad Dad," another called. "Wrong era, that's now," someone else chimed in. I stood awkwardly as Griffin laughed and clapped his hands. It was Radar Radley, because he always had the answers before anyone else. The crowd erupted with fond laughter, and Griffin turned to me, grinning. Well, we can't all remember the little things, huh, Elwood? I smiled thinly and stepped aside, trying to make myself as small as possible, but the damage was already done. Griffin read the next question himself. What's Radley's favorite dessert? The answer was key lime pie, which I remembered only because it had been the one dessert my mother had made for both of us when we were younger. But no one asked me, and no one waited for my input. Instead, Lenora shouted the answer from across the room, earning a round of applause. As the trivia continued, it became increasingly clear that this was less about celebrating Radley and more about broadcasting how little everyone else, especially me, mattered in comparison. The final round ended with a slideshow of Radley's childhood, culminating in a photo of him holding his college diploma, standing beside my father and Lenora. I wasn't in the picture. I hadn't even been invited to the ceremony. As the crowd clapped again, Halston took the mic from Griffin. I just want to say how proud I am, he began, his voice taking on that performative sincerity I'd grown up resenting. Radley has always been the kind of son who made things happen. Sharp, dependable, and ambitious. He paused, scanning the room. We can't all be that way, and that's okay. Not everyone's built to lead or build a family, well, even show up on time. Another wave of laughter. But Radley is the kind of man you write stories about, the kind of man who turns a last name into a legacy. The room clapped again, some more enthusiastically than others. I stood completely still. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I just stared at my father, wondering if he even realized he was holding a dagger, or if he did and simply liked the feel of it. The mic passed to Radley, who smiled graciously and said, Honestly, I've learned everything from watching you, Dad. You're the blueprint. And to have you here today, he gestured to the guests, to all of you, really, it means the world. He didn't look at me, not once. The microphone never came my way again. When the speeches ended and people returned to mingling, I stepped outside again, pretending to take a call just to escape the growing lump in my throat. I walked past the same catering staff that had earlier moved my dish, now laughing among themselves by the side entrance. One of them asked me if I needed anything. I said no thank you, and leaned against the stucco wall of the house, staring at the stretch of blue sky above the backyard. A breeze passed by and carried the scent of lemon, faint and fleeting. I wondered if someone had finally opened the cornbread, or if it had been quietly tossed away with the plastic wrapping still intact. Eventually, I made my way back inside just as a new party game began, this one involving baby predictions. I returned to my isolated seat and noticed that someone had cleared away the plate that had once held my untouched card. In its place was a napkin with the words "Reserved for Family" written in fancy script. It made me laugh under my breath. A reserved seat at a table where no one would sit. Appropriate. I stayed there, sipping the last of my lemonade, until I heard another round of laughter erupt from the living room. Griffin had apparently announced a rapid-fire question round, and now he was pointing directly at me again. Let's give Elwood another try, he said cheerfully. Come on, man, redemption time. He waved me toward him like a magician, calling up a reluctant volunteer. I shook my head. He smiled wider. Don't be shy. This one's easy. Just tell us what Radley majored in at college. I stared at him. That wasn't easy. I genuinely didn't know. I hadn't been part of the college tour, or the enrollment paperwork, or the graduation. No one had told me. Finance? I guessed. Close, Griffin said. Economics. Another laugh. Another spotlight moment. Like this had always been the script, and I had simply wandered back into my role after years of absence. A role I never wanted, but was never allowed to decline. I didn't even notice my father approaching until his cologne reached me, a bitter citrus scent I remembered from childhood, one that used to signal disappointment was about to be delivered. He placed a hand on my shoulder like a manager checking inventory. You all right, son? He asked, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. You've been quiet. Still that shy little boy, huh? I looked up at him, keeping my expression neutral. Just taking it all in, I replied. It's Radley's day. He smiled, that same tight-lipped grin that never quite reached his eyes. Yes, it is, he said. You know, I always thought you'd find your stride eventually. Not everyone's meant to be a Radley, and that's okay. He patted my shoulder once, then walked off toward the kitchen, leaving the weight of his words behind like an oil stain. The guests moved back inside for cake cutting, and I followed reluctantly, hovering at the edge of the crowd. Radley stood beside Blair at the center island, a large blue cake adorned with fondant baby shoes between them. Everyone gathered close, phones raised, eyes gleaming. Speech, someone called out. Radley laughed, rubbing the back of his neck like a seasoned public speaker. All right, he said. I'll say a few words. He lifted his glass and began. This year has been the most incredible of my life. I got promoted, we bought a house, and now we're expecting a little one. And I have to say, I wouldn't have done any of this without the best example of what a man should be, my dad. Halston beamed beside him, puffed with pride like a monarch anointing his heir. Dad taught me everything I know about hard work, ambition, and legacy, Radley continued. He showed me what it means to build something that lasts. I just hope I can be half the man he is. The crowd applauded. Some even wiped away tears. Blair kissed Radley's cheek. It was picture perfect. Then Radley's voice changed, his tone softening just enough to sound humble. Of course, I didn't get here alone. I had support. Family. People who pushed me to be better. People who always showed me what not to do. A few chuckles rolled through the room, hesitant at first, but growing as people realized the target of the punchline. Like my brother, Radley said, turning to face me, locking eyes from across the kitchen. Elwood always kept to himself, always marched to the beat of a different drum. He was unique. Kind of like that kid in school who knows every serial number on vending machines but never buys a snack. The room exploded with laughter. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I stood perfectly still, absorbing every decibel like it was background static. Radley continued, smiling wide. But hey, he's got heart. He means well. Still figuring things out, I guess. You know, some people take longer to launch. Late bloomers. I could feel my jaw tighten, my spine straighten. The phrase late bloomer echoed in my ears like a slap. I had worked night shifts through college, taught myself coding on outdated machines, and spent years developing a diagnostic platform that hospitals now depended on, but none of that mattered here. Not in this house. Not in front of these people. Here, I was the brother who still fixed hospital machines, who never married, who never bought a house, who never made Dad proud. A guest approached my father and asked him jokingly, "So, is Elwood adopted, or just the artistic one?" My father didn't laugh. He didn't correct the man. He just smiled and said, he's on his own journey. The cake was cut, the cameras flashed, and plates were passed around. No one offered me a slice. I walked back to my chair, unnoticed, and sat down with my hands folded. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. I wasn't even embarrassed anymore. I felt something colder than that. I felt clarity. There was no misunderstanding here. No accident. They didn't forget me. They ignored me on purpose. They chose their narrative and wrote me out of it. And now, with the whole room watching, they were casting me as the outsider, the pity case, the cautionary tale that made Radley look even better by contrast. I glanced across the room and caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked exactly how I felt, present but invisible. Suddenly, Griffin called out again. Before we move to presents, let's do one more round. Quick fire comparison. Who wore it better, baby edition? We've got baby photos of Radley and a few surprise guests. Let's vote. The screen behind him lit up with a baby photo of Radley in a tuxedo onesie, followed by a baby photo of me potty training, sitting on a training seat with a crooked grin and a bowl haircut. The crowd roared. "Ah, that explains everything," someone shouted. Griffin laughed. Y'all, is this a diaper ad or a PSA? My face flushed, not from shame, but from something else. Resolve. I watched them point and laugh, remembering how I trusted them once. How that photo had been taken by my mom long before Lenora arrived, back when joy was private and sacred. Somehow, it had made its way here, stripped of meaning, repurposed for a punchline. I stood up slowly and walked toward the restroom, ignoring the eyes following me, the murmurs I no longer feared. As I closed the door behind me, I looked in the mirror again. This time, I saw more than exhaustion. I saw restraint, because even now I wasn't retaliating. Not yet. I didn't stay long in the bathroom, only enough time to rinse my face with cold water and breathe out the sting that had settled deep into my ribs. I stared at my reflection again, memorizing the man I was, wrinkled shirt, dark circles under my eyes, a face they didn't recognize because they'd never cared to see it clearly. When I stepped out, the laughter had died down and the group had moved on to gift unwrapping. Radley was seated in a throne-like chair in front of a stack of blue-wrapped boxes while Blair rested beside him, glowing with attention and mock humility. Griffin circled like a court jester, announcing the gifts one by one. From the Spencers, an electric baby rocker. From the Gordons, a bottle sterilizer set. From Halston and Lenora, a silver spoon set and monogram baby blankets. The guests oohed and awed at every present, clapping as if royalty were being honored. I stayed in the back of the room, away from the cameras, away from the performance, until I saw Griffin hold up a card with my handwriting on it. "Oh, we have one here from Elwood," he said with a smirk, as if pronouncing the name of a character no one remembered from the script. A few guests turned toward me. Let's see what the mystery man brought. He opened the box and pulled out a handmade baby quilt, stitched with little animals and Radley's name. It wasn't expensive, but I'd made it myself, late at night in my apartment, because I figured it was the only thing I could contribute that came from the heart. Griffin paused, clearly not sure how to spin it into a laugh. He glanced at Radley. "Sentimental type, huh?" Radley smiled thinly, then said, "That's cute, Elwood. I'm sure we can find a use for it. Maybe in the guest room crib or something." A few quiet chuckles followed. "Handmade," someone muttered. "How quaint." The quilt was folded and pushed aside. That was when I knew. I knew I had officially reached the bottom rung of this family ladder, the rung where even kindness was repackaged as pity. I didn't expect a standing ovation, but I also didn't expect to feel like a charity case in a room full of people who wore gratitude like an accessory. I stepped back toward the hallway when my father walked up beside me, drink in hand, eyes scanning the room like a general surveying his kingdom. "Nice gesture," he said, nodding toward the quilt. "Takes time to make something by hand, though next time, maybe just Venmo them a contribution. Save yourself the trouble." He sipped the scotch. Blair's parents gave them a week's stay in Maui. "Just saying." I nodded slowly. "You're right. Next time I'll just wire over the contents of my soul." He laughed, not because it was funny, but because he assumed I was joking. We stood there for a moment in silence. Then he asked, "Still working at that hospital tech thing?" I turned to him. "I manage critical diagnostic equipment. I also co-developed a platform that tracks early-stage anomalies in patients. It's being piloted statewide next year." He raised his eyebrows slightly. "Huh. Well, maybe if that works out, you'll be able to buy something nice for yourself, like a decent suit." I looked down at my shirt. I'd ironed it twice this morning. He walked off without waiting for a response. Later, while refilling my own cup at the drink station, I overheard Blair telling someone, Radley's brother, "Yeah, he's kind of a mystery. Super introverted, I think. Doesn't really do the whole social thing." The guest replied, "Oh, one of those genius but weird types?" She giggled. "I think he lives alone. Like totally alone. No pets, no partner. Radley says he once dated a nurse for like 3 weeks. But that was years ago." I stood there, holding the lemonade pitcher, invisible again, learning about myself through their gossip. The last blow came just before the final toast. The room had dimmed, champagne glasses distributed, and Halston raised his to make one last speech. To family, he said, smiling warmly, and to the next generation, to legacy, loyalty, and lineage. He gestured to Radley, then looked directly at me, and to the hope that everyone finds their place eventually, even those still searching. He didn't say my name, but the implication hung in the air like fog. The guests clinked glasses. Some smiled at me with forced sympathy, others avoided eye contact entirely. I raised my glass, drank, and felt nothing but resolve brewing in my chest like a slow boil. As the guests began to disperse, Blair came over and offered me a slice of leftover cake on a paper plate. "Thanks for coming, Elwood," she said. "It was really sweet of you to show up." Her tone was that of a teacher thanking a quiet student for participating. I took the cake and nodded. "Of course," I said. "Wouldn't miss it." But in truth, I had missed nothing. I had witnessed everything exactly as it was, raw, undisguised, and unfiltered. I had seen how they celebrated Radley's every move while reducing mine to curiosity or confusion. I had listened to the stories that painted him as the future and me as the fading footnote. And somewhere between the sarcasm and the champagne, I realized something important. They hadn't just underestimated me. They'd entirely misread me. The names of ancestors I'd never met climbed the branches in neat script, connecting generations through marriage and birth dates, victories and losses. But when I reached the bottom, where the youngest branches sprouted, my breath caught. My name was missing. Or rather, it had been covered by a rectangular patch of white paper taped over the spot. The handwriting was sharp, a stark contrast to the elegant script beneath. Someone had written "undetermined profession" in block letters. I touched the paper lightly, feeling the edges peel under my fingers. How long had it been like this? How many times had I walked past without noticing? I felt like a ghost haunting my own history. I scanned the names beside mine, Radley's, Lenora's, even a few family friends who had been adopted into the fold over the years. They were all there, firmly rooted, alive in the lineage. I was an omission, a mistake they refused to acknowledge. I closed my eyes briefly, swallowing the lump rising in my throat. This wasn't about a missing name on a wall. It was about being systematically erased from the story they wanted to tell, the version they wanted the world to believe. I thought back to the party, the subtle snubs, the whispered jokes, the stage compliments. It all made sense now. They didn't just exclude me from moments, they excised me from memory. I turned away and headed toward the hallway where a small study sat behind closed doors. I pushed it open and found a dusty desk piled with photo albums and forgotten papers. I sat down and opened the nearest album, pages yellowed and curled. There were pictures of Mom and Dad smiling together, holiday dinners filled with laughter, birthdays where I was front and center. A pang of nostalgia struck me like a physical blow. How different was this from the polished presentations inside the mansion today? I traced my finger over a picture of a younger me, holding Mom's hand, beaming with innocence. The contrast between that child and the man I'd become was vast, a gulf created by years of neglect and distance. I felt a sudden surge of anger, not toward anyone specific, but at the entire system of family politics that had turned love into currency and affection into status symbols. The study door creaked open, and a voice startled me. It was Lenora, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, eyes cold but calculating. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "This room is private." I looked up and met her gaze. "Neither should I be," I replied evenly. She stepped inside and sat opposite me. "Look, Elwood, I don't make the rules here. You're complicated. Dad wants to keep things simple. We're building a legacy, not a museum of the past." I shook my head. "That's not how family works." She smiled sadly. "Not here. Not anymore." Her words stung, but they also crystallized something for me. This wasn't just about exclusion. It was about rewriting the past to suit a narrative. To be complicated was to be a problem to erase. She stood up and left without another word, leaving the door ajar behind her. I sat alone with the albums, turning pages that captured a history I feared was slipping away. I realized then that if I wanted to reclaim my place in the family, I couldn't wait for them to invite me back. I had to find my own way. He was a man as unyielding as the desert sun, a former aerospace engineer who'd built his career far from the glittering mansions and fragile facades of my father's world. His voice, gravelly but firm, broke the silence of my apartment. "Elwood, I'm coming up for a visit. We need to talk." I hesitated, wondering what could be important enough to pull him from his recluse. But something in his tone demanded attention, a promise of reckoning. When Rufus arrived, he was exactly as I remembered, broad-shouldered, gray hair swept back, eyes sharp as a hawk's. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You're here because your family has been dishonest with you," he said bluntly, settling into my worn-out couch. "They've rewritten the story, painted you as a failure, erased your contributions. It's a lie. You're the only one who's stayed true to what the Mays legacy should be." His words hit me like a thunderclap. I'd spent years internalizing the neglect and disdain, but hearing it called a lie from the man who'd shaped my father's beginnings was almost unbelievable. "What do you mean?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Rufus pulled out a thick envelope from his briefcase, sealed with the family crest. "This," he said, "is the original will and estate plan drafted by my father, your great-grandfather. It names you as the rightful heir to a substantial portion of the family fortune, including shares in the aerospace tech company I helped build." I stared at the envelope, disbelief and hope battling inside me. "But my father, he said I was cut out of everything," I said. "That's because your father, Halston, decided to rewrite the legacy. He wanted a different story, one that favored Radley and Lenora." Rufus's eyes darkened, but I never agreed. And I never signed off on it. Over the next several hours, Rufus laid out the truth in painstaking detail. The years of betrayal, the forged documents, the manipulation of legal papers, all to exclude me from what was rightfully mine. "You have to fight, Elwood," he said firmly. "Not just for the money or the business, but for your place in this family, for your dignity." I felt the weight of his words settle like armor over my weary spirit. This was more than an inheritance dispute. This was about reclaiming my identity, rewriting the narrative that had been stolen from me. "But how?" I asked. "They have the house, the money, the image." Rufus smiled grimly. "They have the illusion, but you have the truth. And sometimes that's all you need." The next morning, we visited a lawyer Rufus trusted, someone with the knowledge and integrity to challenge the false documents. The legal battle ahead would be fierce. I knew the stakes: my father's pride, Radley's reputation, Lenora's carefully constructed facade, but I was no longer willing to fade into the background. Rufus and I devised a plan to expose the truth, starting with gathering evidence, witnesses, and expert testimony. Meanwhile, I began documenting my own story, my work in medical technology, my contributions to the community, and the constant neglect I had endured. I was transforming from the silent victim into a determined claimant. The grandfather who once seemed like a relic was now my strongest ally, the bridge between my lost past and the future I was about to claim. He motioned for me to sit and slid a thick manila envelope toward me. "Inside this," he said quietly, "is the original will, the real estate deeds, the share certificates, everything they tried to hide." My hands trembled as I unfolded the documents, my eyes scanning the official stamps, signatures, and dates that confirmed what I had long suspected but never fully dared to believe, that I was the rightful heir to a significant portion of the family fortune and holdings. Among the papers was a letter from my great-grandfather addressed directly to me, expressing hope that I would carry forward the family's values of integrity and innovation, not just wealth and appearances. Tears prickled my eyes as I absorbed the weight of his words, the generations of faith and expectation placed in me. The next day, with Rufus by my side, we met with the lawyer who would help us challenge the forged documents my father had produced. The lawyer was meticulous, his eyes sharp and wary as he examined every detail of the case. "This is not just a civil dispute," he warned. "This is a battle for your identity and legacy. Your father and his legal team won't give up easily." I nodded, feeling the gravity settle over me. The fight ahead would test not just our resources but our resolve. Over the following weeks, we uncovered more evidence, emails, financial statements, handwritten notes that painted a clearer picture of the deliberate effort to exclude me. But even as the legal battle progressed, the emotional toll weighed heavy. My father cut off communication, and Radley avoided family gatherings. Lenora sent thinly veiled warnings through intermediaries. Yet, with each attempt to intimidate, my determination only grew. I realized that this fight was bigger than money. It was about reclaiming the narrative stolen from me, about standing up to a family that had tried to erase me. One afternoon, Rufus invited me to a private meeting with the family lawyer and a trusted notary. The room was quiet, tense. Rufus placed a sealed envelope on the table. "This will be presented at the upcoming family meeting," he said. "It's the legally binding document that reinstates your rights as heir." The lawyer nodded approvingly. "Once introduced, it will challenge the current will's validity. The family won't be able to ignore it." I looked around the room, feeling the weight of history pressing down on me. This was the moment when secrets would be unveiled and the true legacy would be revealed. In the days leading up to the family gathering, whispers and rumors circulated. Radley's confident smirk faded, replaced by a nervous edge. My father's usual composure cracked beneath the surface. And Lenora? She became quieter, calculating every move with precision. At the gathering, with the family assembled in the grand living room, I stood with Rufus and the lawyer. The sealed envelope was opened, and the documents laid bare before the group. Gasps filled the room. My father's face paled. Radley's eyes widened in disbelief. The truth, once hidden behind layers of lies and manipulation, was now impossible to deny. The original will reinstated my position, recognizing my contributions and rightful claim to the estate and company shares. The unveiling of the original will sent shockwaves through the family, but what surprised me most was the rapid unraveling of my father's carefully constructed image. For decades, Halston Mays had been the unshakable patriarch, the man whose word was law and whose ambitions shaped the family's trajectory. Now, in the stark light of truth, his confident facade began to crack like brittle glass. Within days of the family meeting, the news spread quietly through social circles and whispered conversations. At first, Radley's usual bravado held strong. He laughed off rumors as baseless gossip and brushed off questions about the will with practiced nonchalance. But beneath that veneer, I could see cracks forming, hesitations in his voice, fleeting glances of doubt when our eyes met across crowded rooms. My father was far less composed. I watched him retreat into a shell of guarded silence, his commanding presence replaced by terse phone calls and closed-door meetings with lawyers and accountants. Halston was no longer the master puppeteer pulling the strings. Instead, he became a man scrambling to salvage a legacy slipping through his fingers. During a particularly tense family dinner, I sat at the table with Rufus and a few close relatives who had remained loyal. My father barely spoke, his usual booming voice reduced to curt remarks. Radley, trying to mask his unease, fidgeted with his napkin and avoided eye contact. Lenora maintained her poised exterior, but her eyes darted nervously. As we ate, whispers floated from the other room, friends and distant relatives speculating about what the new will meant for family dynamics and financial control. I felt a quiet satisfaction, but tempered it with patience. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. The next few weeks brought legal battles and media leaks. The family name splashed in headlines as a story of wealth, betrayal, and fractured ties. I received threatening letters disguised as warnings, and Lenora's subtle intimidation tactics escalated. But every attempt to shake me only solidified my resolve. One evening, during a heated phone call with my father's attorney, I heard a rare tremor in their voice, a hint of desperation. "Your case has merit," they admitted, "but your father and Mr. Radley won't back down without a fight." I responded calmly, "Neither will I." Publicly, I maintained my composure, attending events with Rufus and supporters who believed in fairness. Behind closed doors, strategies were planned, evidence gathered, alliances forged. Radley, once so sure of his place, began to distance himself from the family spotlight, avoiding social events and business meetings. I couldn't help but notice how isolated he became, the weight of the unfolding truth pressing heavily on him. Months passed since the truth shattered the illusion my family had carefully maintained, and each day brought new challenges and revelations. The courtroom battles tested not only my resolve, but the very fabric of my identity. But amidst the legal wrangling and whispered conversations, a quiet transformation took root within me. I was no longer the sidelined son, the forgotten brother, or the shadow beneath Radley's spotlight. I was becoming the architect of my own legacy, built on truth, integrity, and perseverance. The day the judge ruled in my favor was bittersweet. The courtroom was packed with family, friends, and curious onlookers. My father's face was a mixture of defeat and disbelief, while Radley's expression was unreadable, perhaps for the first time, uncertain. As the ruling was read aloud, restoring to me not only the financial inheritance, but also the recognition that had been denied for years, a swell of relief and vindication surged through me. Yet, I knew this victory was more than just a transfer of assets. It was a restoration of identity, a reclamation of dignity stolen by years of neglect and deceit. After the proceedings, I stood outside the courthouse with Rufus and a small group of supporters. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Rufus clapped me on the back and said, "You did what many wouldn't dare to do. Stand up when it mattered most." I smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. That night, I returned to my apartment, now filled with the hum of possibilities rather than the echoes of isolation. I reflected on the journey, the loneliness, the humiliation, the battles fought in silence and in courts. I realized that my worth had never been tied to my father's approval or my family's acceptance, but to the courage to be true to myself. In the weeks that followed, I used my inheritance not just to secure my future, but to invest in causes close to my heart, supporting medical research, education for underprivileged youth, and programs that promote family healing and reconciliation. I reached out to my brother, not with resentment, but with hope. Our conversations were cautious but sincere, an acknowledgement that while the past could not be erased, the future held potential for understanding and growth. Through this, I learned the most profound lesson of all, that family is not solely defined by blood or wealth, but by respect, compassion, and the willingness to fight for what is just. Standing on my own 2 feet, I found freedom not in riches, but in reclaiming my story and forging a path where no one's worth is measured by their proximity to power. The legacy I now carry is one of resilience and truth, a reminder that sometimes the quietest voices hold the deepest strength, and that redemption is possible even after the darkest betrayals. If you've been following my story so far, I really appreciate you sticking with me through every twist and turn. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps me share more stories like this. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the plot too. Did you expect the way things unfolded? What part hit you the hardest? Also, where are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let me know. Your support means a lot, and I can't wait to connect with you in the comments.